last time. Chance might be the cold, baby, stay yet, Bill Joe.
Oh, yeah, it's the Matt Kwasiborski Show calling you live and direct from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, back home in my neighborhood of Fishtown. Here for just the end of a vacation, or if you're a friend of British humor or English overseas, that would be the end of my holiday. Not really a holiday, just have not been down in D.C. for a little while, but that will end this weekend. But very excited to be here, trying to get on the show tonight to do a podcast. It's been a while. It's been about 3 weeks since I did one. Been kind of focusing on my own little projects that I hope to announce soon, as well as just life in general, getting centered with yourself, right? Getting a little bit more balance in your life. Find out what's important to you and what sets you straight on the righteous path. So again, before we get started, this is the Matt Kwasiborski Show. I want to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. I want to thank Speaker Platform, and I am the 5,487,154th Philadelphia sports podcast that you could probably find on the internet today. But hell, let's go out there and just want to thank my loyal listeners about what we are talking about now. And remember what tonight is. It's also the beginning of this weekend. Yes. That's right. It is Thursday, April the 27th. 2023, and it's the NFL draft. Round 1 is tonight, round 2 and 3 tomorrow, and then the rest of the draft will be held on Saturday. The NFL has done a fantastic job of breaking the draft to make it more of a weekend instead of a one day, all day on Saturday thing. I remember watching an entire Phillies game one time, and even the first round was not completed, and the Eagles at the time had not drafted. We're going to talk about what the Eagles could do. I don't think anyone has any earthly clue. This is one of the craziest drafts that we've had in a long time, and that is the 4:30 bell here in the chime in the background. If you hear it, it is 4:30, so that's what we're talking about. But I want to first jump off. There's a lot of good things going on and a lot of similar things that are going on in the world of Philadelphia sports. Congrats to the Phillies. They hit the 500 mark today. They beat a very competitive yet Seattle Mariners team, 1-0 in a very fast-paced game. Great job by Matt Stram and the Phillies bullpen to shut down the Mariners. And they really held the Mariners, the entire pitching staff, scoreless since the second inning. So it's 9 innings today and then 7 innings yesterday. So that's the last 16 innings they pitched shutout ball. Matt Stram, who's filling in for Ranger Suarez, our number 3 star, has pitched phenomenally so far, even though his record doesn't show it. He was a free agent signed away from the Cleveland Guardians. I think he got 2 years, $15 million deal. Really to be another left-handed bullpen guy, but he's really done a fantastic job stepping in for Ranger Suarez, who might be back next week. We will see about that. The Sixers are awaiting their second-round opponent. Right now, the Boston Celtics and the Atlanta Hawks go in for Game 6 tonight in Atlanta. The Hawks cut the deficit from 3-1 to 3-2, and the Sixers will play probably the Boston Celtics, I guess, or the Atlanta Hawks at this point. They don't really reseed anymore, as the other Eastern Coast Conference semifinal has been set. The New York Knicks knocked off the Cleveland Cavaliers 4-1. Congrats to the Knicks. I watched some of their games, won a little money on their first opening game, and then the Miami Heat pulled up one of the biggest upsets that we've seen in NBA history, as they are the play-in 8th seed that knocked off the number 1 Milwaukee Bucks in 5 games with a hurt Giannis. Giannis missed games 2 and 3, hurt his back in game 1, so that really dampened the hopes of the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis played well, had some interesting comments after the game. But then the Sixers, like I said, going back to them, they'll play their longtime rival, the Boston Celtics, or the hated Atlanta Hawks. The odds of the Hawks pushing this, winning the series, are pretty low. Could they push it to a Game 7? They could. They went up to Boston and they won a game up there. That was an amazing game that they played, and now they're back in Atlanta for what they should be not really the favorites. I think Boston played a very sloppy game in Game 5, and the Hawks had to storm back, and Trae Young was phenomenal in that fourth quarter. They could go to Boston, pull the upset, but Boston, if you're the coach of Boston, you're just like, get back to basics, play Boston basketball, and that's what they will probably do tonight. And it just goes to what I want to begin to talk about before we get into the NFL draft, is Philadelphia sports in general. And, Philadelphia sports fans, we have the mentality the world is against us, grew up that way. I kind of lost that since leaving Philadelphia for so many years in terms of being here every day compared to, my good friends that live here, work here. But I don't know if any other city has these consistent problems that we have, and it goes one to Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is our franchise player. He's is probably going to win the MVP finally this year. Had a phenomenal last 2 years. To be honest, in the regular season, he's been the runner-up for the MVP the last 2 years, and he's probably going to win it this year. But he gets to the playoffs, and just these freak injuries keep happening to him over and over and over and over again. And I'm trying to pick my brain as to what other team in any other sport consistently has their best player hurt through freak injuries every time the playoffs start. And I really can't think of one basketball star that's always hurt, always kind of banged up and can't finish. I think Giannis this year, he's had some injuries over the years, but this is incredible. Like, I was looking at, someone posted what Joel Embiid has gone through. He tore his meniscus once in his knee. He's fractured his orbital 1 year. He fractured an orbital last year and was playing through a torn ligament in his thumb. He had another knee injury, and yet this is probably the third knee injury that he has into the playoffs. The injury he has, we don't know how serious it is. It's called the LCL. It's a definitely sprain or a partial tear of that ligament. And they did the MRI, but they're not releasing how serious it is, mainly for competitive reasons. You don't want your opponent knowing how bad you're hurt, but he's hurt. He's not going to be the same player. He's not going to be MVP Joel Embiid when he steps on the floor. This is why, in a way, we want the Hawks-Celtics game going to 7 games. And that way that gives Joel more time to rest. So, for example, if the Celtics had closed out the series the other night, then Game 1 would have been Saturday, Game 2 Monday. Now that's Game 1's pushed to Monday, Game 2 Wednesday. Joel Embiid, that is, he may not even play in Game 1. He might not be ready. If you have just the strain, the level 1 sprain, basically, which isn't a tear, it's almost a tear, but it isn't. The prognosis is 1 to 2 weeks fully rest before you can get back out there and be the player that you were. 1 to 2 weeks, it's day 9 now, but Joel's when you hurt your knee, he's obviously not running. He might be doing some underwater treatment. They do a lot of underwater running these days. One of the new things that sports science has brought out in different ways to keep the impact off of the back and the ligaments. You run underwater, but it still gets you into shape. That could be something he's doing. A hyperthrombic chamber he's probably sleeping in every night, but it's still not the same. And I just again, like I said, it's Philadelphia against the world. I don't get on the refs. I don't get on the umpires that much or blame them for losses. I can see how they alter games, and sometimes I'll call them out. And I do that mainly because I used to work with referees at the college level when I was a college student, training them, getting them into position. And in my job, you almost always had to have their backs, unless they were just chaotic and not very good. But those are the guys that you supported. So, what happens in real time, like we have the benefit of sitting at home and seeing 17 different multiple angles of the same play and 17 different speeds. Of course, mistakes are going to happen. The refs have one chance to make a call at one time. You can review it. It is possible to review now, but it's not. You can't review every play. And some plays are just unreviewable. The Phillies had one last night where they hit a ball that the Mariners' third baseman, trapped. It looked like he caught the ball in the air, and you couldn't challenge it because the position player was too far in from the umpire, so couldn't challenge that call. It's a weird rule, but that's what it is. And the way the ball was trapped, it should have been a base hit. The third baseman did the right thing. He caught the ball and as fastly and covered up with his glove in a way that third base umpire just couldn't make that call. So, these things happen, but I'm just trying to think of who's often injured all of the time in the playoffs, and it's your star player. It's your best player. It's the one player you really can't live without in a 7-game series. And the Boston Celtics have had our number. The Sixers have struggled. They have not gotten out of the second round in the Joel Embiid era. And if they get past the second round somehow over Boston, they're going to play the winner of Miami and New York. And those two, whoever comes out of that series, they're going to be beaten up and banged up because of the way the New York Knicks play basketball under Tom Thibodeau. They've gone back to the old Pat Riley, Jeff Van Gundy Knicks, where they're banging you, not, one maybe offensive player threat. And it's just, every time you go in the lane, you're hit. Every time you put up the shot, you're getting hit. Like, it's going to be a tough series for the Miami Heat. They have the experience and a little bit better talent offensively to overcome that, but whoever comes out of that series, is going to be banged up. And I think the winner of the Boston Sixers series has a clear path to the finals right now. The NBA also doesn't reseed, which they used to do. And what I mean by that is that whoever wins the rounds, you would be reseeded. So, for example, in this, because Miami pulled off the upset as the 8th seed, that means the number 1 seed was knocked out. They would automatically play the winner of the 2 or 3 seed, and then in the next round that way, and then the 3 seed would play the 5 seed, or so on and so forth. Like, it would be reseeded to where 2 would play 8 and 3 would play 5 at this point, but it's going to be 2 versus 3 and 5 versus 8. It's just the way it is. You can't complain about it. It's a shame they switched it this year. But the Sixers really have to get past Boston. They're going to need James Harden on his game every night. Against Boston, he looked exceptionally well in 2 games, and he looked very well in the other 2 games. He's going to have to be exceptionally well in all of the games, whether it's 4 games or 7 games, and the same for Maxey and the same for Tobias. Tobias has a history of disappearing in the second round from games from time to time. Everyone wanted to blame Ben Simmons, rightfully so, but Tobias Harris also, he'd be there in game 1 and then kind of disappear game 2, maybe come back for game 3, and then he's gone. He's either running out of gas or he stops being aggressive. Embiid against Brooklyn, he didn't look right the entire series, but they didn't really need him to be dominant. He scored 26 points the first night. Other than that, he didn't get over 20 points, and he was the scoring leader. We all know in the third game now he was hurt, and all those guys that were ripping him on Philadelphia Air saying, oh, he's weak, he's mentally weak, he was nowhere to be found, didn't look like he wanted to be. He was hurt. He tore his knee ligament. Let's get to the bottom before we always start criticizing. Easier said than done. But again, it's like, what is with Philadelphia sports and our teams and our star players? This isn't like, and I hate to say, Tobias Harris getting hurt, and he's not available. But then you have people that can step up. This is Joel Embiid, the best big man in the game, the MVP of this year, the runner-up the last 2 years, and a lot of people thought that he should have been the MVP in those years. And there's a solid arguments for that. But at the same time, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And again, it's just we're going to go into this series against Boston already with a weakened Joel Embiid. And it sucks. It really sucks. It's not the end of the world, but it still is like, well, what do you do after this? And then if he's not the same, or if he is the same and they lose, it might be time to think about trading Joel Embiid. John, who's shout out to John and the Forfeit Podcast guys. John's birthday was yesterday. He turned the ripe age of 40. So shout out to John. He thinks that if the Sixers don't win the championship, that they will be trading Joel Embiid. James Harden will maybe walk. He might go somewhere else next year. He could be mercenarying it out and go to the team that just pays him a lot of money no matter how good they are. A lot of talk during the year he wants to maybe go back to Houston. Houston's not going to be very good. They're not going to be in contention next year. You never know. Who knows what happens in the offseason, but right now they didn't make the playoffs or even the play-in games. So therefore, he's going to a team like that. He's not at the level where he can carry a team anymore, but he's a great second player to Joel, second player to Maxey. Like, he's a great facilitator, but I don't think we should be able to count on him to be the leading scorer against Boston, no matter the status of Embiid. And going back to Philadelphia sports, and the other times that I point out, besides these Embiid freak injuries in the playoffs, you have to go back to Ryan Howard, who was my favorite Philly during those runs, him and Roy Halladay. And I love Jimmy Rollins too. Jimmy Rollins is up there. But in terms of homegrown players, it'd be Rollins and Howard and Utley and those guys. But the way the 2011 Phillies lost, they're the best team in the regular season. They played the St. Louis Cardinals, who caught fire and actually won the World Series that year, I believe. knocked the Phillies off. No thanks to Cliff Lee, but the very last out of a 1-0 shutout, where that was the last time we saw Roy Halladay pitch like Roy Halladay. The Phillies lost 1-0. The last out of the game was Ryan Howard hits a weak ground ball to first base, and as he's trying to get out of the batter's box, he falls and rips his Achilles, tears his Achilles. Like, that's how he went down. He was never the same player again. He was out most of the next year because it's an Achilles injury, and in baseball, especially at first base, that takes a lot of toll on your ankles and your Achilles tendon. Then his knees were hurting because of it, and he just never able to regain the form that he had after 2011. And I go back to the Eagles, the Fog Bowl. Fog Bowl was played as a playoff game on New Year's Eve, 1987 or 88, December 31st. Eagles are the new team coming up. They have the former Chicago Bears defensive coordinator, Buddy Ryan, who constructed those great Bears defenses of the early and mid-'80s, and they were still very prominent without Buddy. He pretty much molds the Philadelphia Eagles defense into one of the best defenses I'd seen. They had an electric young player named Randall Cunningham at the time, who was pretty much, people say he was ahead of his time. I don't like to use that term because that was the time he was supposed to play. He was just he was the glimpse into the future of the quarterback position at the NFL at the time, with quarterbacks who could run, who could throw the ball and had rockets of an arm, things like that. They go into Chicago. They are the darlings, the favorites to pull the upset in Soldier Field. I don't know, at halftime, the fog rolls in. The game was either scoreless or it was a very close game at halftime. The Eagles might have been winning that game. Fog rolls in off of Lake Michigan or whatever damn lake is near Chicago. And you can't even see the rest of the game. The announcers could barely call the game. You couldn't even see the refs. You could barely see the field. Somehow Randall Cunningham throws for 400 yards in the fog, and the Eagles lose the game. Now, where in the hell have you heard about this happening again? This isn't a snow game. Snow games, you can clear the field. Maybe you could. It does affect it. So does the rain. But the fog is just a different beast out there. Like, I mean, it's just, you've ever been in fog, you know what it is. Sometimes you can't see in front of you 10 feet in front of you, or 3 meters, or whatever metric system or English system you want to use. And this was my baptism into Philadelphia sports. Like, it's just these random occurrences that affect our teams, affect our chances to win, that are uncontrollable. You know, it's not bad coaching. It's not, oh, well, you know, he dropped the ball and that's on him. You know, Alshon Jeffrey, that wasn't Alshon Jeffrey's complete fault why we lost that game. But at the same time, like, okay, those things happen on the court. Kawhi Leonard, you know, again, with the Jimmy Butler Sixers, hits that game-winning shot in Game 7 at the buzzer, it rolls in. That stuff happens, and that's not like bad luck. That's just a great shot by Kawhi Leonard. But these freak injuries to Joel Embiid, the Fog Bowl, Ryan Howard tearing his Achilles, it was just a freak injury. Like, ended not only, it was the symbol of the end of that run, and it was just hard to watch because they held on to those players, the Phillies, for a couple more years, and they just weren't the same. And it's like, where does this happen, especially with Joel Embiid? You know, if they wind up playing Boston, it's just going to be a tough series for them. Boston has some very athletic. They're a very fast team. They can shoot from the outside. They play good defense. I think they just were not playing basketball the other night. It looked like the series was over going into that fourth quarter in the game the other night. And Atlanta Hawks were like, wait a second, this isn't over yet. And now you would go into Game 6 and tonight. And if the Hawks could push it to Game 7, it just helps the Eagles out. It really does. However, we're here to talk. We are literally less than 4 hours away, and we will play, just in case we forgot what we're turning into tonight. And if you're unfamiliar with that chime, that is the ESPN chime for the NFL draft when the team is ready to make its selection.
A lot of people
it kind of goes in and it just shows all the announcers and the people in the room that, hey, the next pick is in, the commissioner comes up, announces the name, or whoever comes up, and that's basically what that chime is. But it's become famous over the years that there's no mistaking if you are an NFL fan of what that sound means. And here we are. Eagles have coming off a Super Bowl loss, unfortunately. Not going to go back into that, but they have two draft picks in the first round, the number 10 pick and the number 30 pick tonight. It's very odd that a team that made the Super Bowl picks this high. They usually pick down where the 30th position is usually where the Super Bowl runner-up picks. Usually it's 31 with 32 teams, but the Miami Dolphins got docked I've never seen the doctor draft pick, so they don't have a first-round pick because of tampering. So anyway, you don't really need to know that because that's a rarity that happens in the NFL in terms of the NFL actually docking teams for illegal activity. But thanks to the shrewdness of Howie Roseman, considered the best GM in all of football right now, and rightfully so. Shout out to John again. He's deserved it. He's built this team in his image and got us back to the Super Bowl within 5 years in a completely different personality outside of the offensive line. Brand new quarterback, Jalen Hurts, the runner-up for the MVP this year, signs a 5-year, $255 million extension where anywhere between 140 and 180 is guaranteed. That is setting the market, did not help Lamar Jackson in his quest to get a lot of money guaranteed, but it's a very team-friendly deal. Between the salary cap, which means if you average out a salary of 5 into 25 is about $51 million a year. He's not going to get paid that this year. His base salary is only $1 million. It gets pushed down the line in signing bonuses. And the reason for that, it gives the Eagles a cap flexibility to add some key players. And they're going to be adding a draft pick, either 1 or 2 draft picks, or maybe 0. Maybe they trade out or they trade their draft picks for some key veterans that went out of other teams like Budda Baker or DeAndre Hopkins out of Arizona. The odds are that they stay at those positions are low, but who knows? This is really a crapshoot. Outside of the number 1 pick, which the Carolina Panthers traded up, and it looks like it's going to be Bryce Young, the quarterback out of Alabama, Heisman Trophy winner. A little debate up until the last couple of weeks. It just seemed like it could be C.J. Stroud from Ohio State. Who knows? Maybe someone tries to trade up with Carolina. They back down as they want another quarterback, the Colts. Outside of that, no one knows what's going to happen. You look at these mock drafts, and I love a mock draft. I just absolutely love a good mock. I don't care what time. I'll write after the NFL, the first article that comes out on Sunday after the draft will be the 2024 mock draft. It's going to be all, and I'll be reading them. I don't read all the synopsis on players even this year. It's just, okay, let's see what team is drafting for what and what needs they have. So in the NFL and in all professional sports, the weaker teams draft to the higher positions based upon the record in the NFL. At least if you have the worst record, you get the number 1 pick. If it's somehow you're tied with a team, they do a coin flip. And the reason the Eagles are in this position, like Seattle is at number 5, is that they just made some very smart trades with some very bad teams the last couple of years to get these picks. We acquired this first-round pick last draft, and we traded with the Saints. The Eagles had 3 number 1 draft picks. They traded around, jumped up, jumped down. The Saints threw in a number 1 draft pick for this year. So the Saints finished with a 7-10 record. So the Eagles were 10. If the Saints had finished with the worst record in the league, we would have had the number 1 overall pick, which would have been crazy considering we just had lost in the Super Bowl, or at least made the Super Bowl. That's right, we made the Super Bowl. If we lost it, we lost it. Anyway, what will the Eagles do with 10? I have no clue. I have no clue what they're going to do at the 10th position. I do know who I want. I want them to go and draft Bijan Robinson out of Texas, the running back. Yes, it's finally time for me to get on board for the Eagles drafting a Texas running back, hinting at Ricky Williams in 1999 when that's all the Eagles wanted was Ricky Williams coming out of Texas. Who flamed out in his career due to concussions, unfortunately, and some injuries. Never thought that kid's head was in the game. He wound up drafted by the Saints that year. I had actually seen him out partying in New Orleans a few times when I was living down there as a young professional. Ricky and I were just about a year apart. So, in age 1 or 2 years apart, so we were hanging in the same places, not with the same crowd, obviously. His girls were just slightly prettier, and his guys had slightly a little bit more money. I just may have just stumbled in there and used the restroom and saw him. Just kidding. Who knows? Anyway, to me, you're getting a impact player. I think Bijan Robinson is considered one of the best running back positions to come out, probably since Saquon Barkley. And he would be coming on a 5-year rookie deal, which means his salary for the next 5 years will be lower than any other impactful running back that they can get at this point. There are some rumors they could trade for Derrick Henry from Tennessee, or even Austin Eckler out in Los Angeles, the Chargers, who to me would be the number one choice, but he's $6 million, and Bijan Robinson's probably, I don't even know what the 10th pick gets. It might be, something like $1 million or $2 million for this year, and it might not even be that high. So the NFL and a lot of the teams, leagues have done this. You draft players in the first round. Their salaries are guaranteed for the next 5 years, or 4 years technically, and then there's a fifth-year team option if you're drafted in the first round, and they slot the money. Obviously the number one draft pick is going to make more than the 31st draft pick in the first round, but it is slotted that way, and that was designed to keep stop rookies from holding out for large deals. These guys would hold out back in the day. Not all of them, but some of them for much more money, and they hadn't done anything on the NFL field, and it's a big difference. So if you can get an impact player coming out on the offense, protect Jalen Hurts in terms of getting him another offensive weapon. The Eagles have not addressed the running back position in a way you would hope that they would have. They did sign Rashad Penny to a 1 year, $1.5 million deal, which is extremely low for a guy who led the league in average yards per carry, but missed a crap ton of games, is always injured. Probably you can only rely on him for about 7 out of 17 games, maybe 8 or 9, based upon his averages. So when he's on the field, he's hugely impactful, but he's not an everyday back, and he gets injured a lot. The Eagles kept Boston Scott, re-signed him. He's not an everyday back. And they have Kenny Gainwell. I think he'll be entering in the third year of his 4-year rookie deal because he was not drafted in the first round. So anyone after that, they get 4-year deals. And, Kenny Gainwell, he shined in the playoffs, but that's it. I've been around long enough to know to watch NFL players, especially running backs. They'll shine in the playoffs, just caught like bolts of lightning, and then kind of dissipate after that, and they're never really heard from again. Some of them you do hear from again, but long story short, I'm not sold on Kenny Gainwell. The consensus, and if you listen to my draft podcast, as you always do every year, I say you want a 7-year to 10-year starter coming out of a first-round draft pick. I don't care if you're drafted number 1 or number 31 or 32. You want a guy that's coming in that can start for the next 7-10 years, preferably at an all-pro level. Those happens in the trenches, the offensive line, defensive line. Sometimes you can get a good cornerback. I think some of them are coming out lately in the last couple of years. Patrick Surtain is one of them. And I think J.C. Horn of Carolina, once he gets rid of his injury bug, is going to be really good. And that's usually the way it goes. The Eagles don't draft linebackers or running backs in the first round. I was not a fan of the Devonta Smith pick at the time. One, he's very small. I thought he was going to get hit and popped and wouldn't get back up. And there's no saying he won't get hurt. He still has 2 more years. But he's turned into a much better player than I thought he was going to be. A huge contributor. Most of that last year had to do with the trade for A.J. Brown, which made Devonta Smith kind of like option 1A or option B, however you want to phrase it there. And he's proven me great. In the Super Bowl, he had a great Super Bowl. I think the Eagles win that race. But if he gets hurt, doesn't play again, or is ineffective, or leaves after 5 years, it's tough to say that was a win unless they win a Super Bowl with him. If he leaves after 5 years and we won a Super Bowl and he's a major reason, okay, then that's a good pick. But usually want guys in the trenches, and I'm talking like Jordan Davis. He's going to be here the next 4 years. He's going to move into a starting role next year with the loss of Javon Hargrave. Let's see what he's going to be able to do. Fletcher Cox has been a mainstay draft pick, number 1 draft pick, 2012. Brandon Graham, number 1 draft pick, number 10 overall, I think in 2010. That's what you'll hear. Lane Johnson, number 4 overall pick in 2013, I think, 2012, 2013 is his 10 years to the anniversary. He's there. Kelsey drafted in 2012, I believe. He's a mainstay. Mailata is now in his 4th or 5th year. He's a mainstay draft pick. And then Landon Dickerson, 2nd pick overall. So these guys are being drafted, and they're doing it the right way. But I say, you know what, Eagles, throw out that. Take a chance. Take the running back if he's there. The other player that I would like would be Peter Skronsky, the offensive lineman out of Northwestern, which is based in Chicago. We are missing a right guard. Now, he played left tackle in college. Could he just slide into that right guard position and be effective? We'll see. or we have Cam Jurgens, who was drafted last year, could be Kelsey's heir apparent. But we thought about Landon Dickerson. Landon Dickerson was drafted to be Kelsey's heir apparent, and Dickerson's now an all-pro left guard after 2 years. So who knows? Skronsky may be able to come in. We have the best offensive line coach, maybe in the history of the game, or one of the best in the history of the game, and that's not an overstatement. That's an understatement with Jeff Stoutland. There's just molded players, and pretty much the key guy who's created this offensive line. He's an amazing coach and an amazing man, and all the power to him. He never took the he turned down opportunities to interviews for offensive coordinator. Maybe if he would have taken them and been successful, been a head coach by now, but he loves the offensive line. He knows where he likes to be. He loves the organization, and he's happy, and he's the best in the league, and probably the best in my lifetime offensive line coach. And we've had a few here that have impeccable reputations for being offensive line coaches. So the point says to take the offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, Jalen Carter, who was the consensus number one pick if Chicago Bears had stayed there at number one and didn't trade to Carolina. That's when you knew Carolina wants a quarterback. It's going to get a great one in Bryce Young. But Jalen Carter's now fallen because of some character issues, some work ethic issues. He had speeding and an accident issue during the University of Georgia's championship parade. So character, but he still was the number one considered overall pick. I wouldn't be surprised if Houston took him at number 2. Arizona, I wouldn't be surprised if anyone took him anywhere except for the Colts. I think only the Colts and the Panthers are guaranteed to take quarterbacks in the first. Quarterbacks won't get past those two positions. I don't think Houston's going to take one. I don't think they're really in love with them, but you never know. They could surprise someone and take Anthony Richardson. They also have the 12th pick, the Houston Texans, and they could get another stud offensive or defensive lineman down at 12. So that will be kind of interesting. No one really knows. I don't think, though, Carter or Skronsky make it to 10. I don't see Chicago passing up either one of those guys. Look, Jalen Carter is supposed to be the number one overall pick with Chicago. And then Skronsky, who I mentioned is the offensive guard from Northwestern University in Chicago, is a local guy. They have to protect Justin Fields. That is who they want to protect. That is the person they're building around. If they weren't, they would have stayed at number one and taken another quarterback there. But they've decided to build around him. They made some shrewd moves in the offseason, getting some playmakers, to surround him with. So we shall see. I just think Chicago will now build in the trenches there. Not going to make any predictions in terms of who I think the Eagles will wind up with, but I want the running back. If they have to trade back, the only way I see Robinson getting drafted in the first round is Atlanta. A lot of people are mocking him to Atlanta at 8. And the reason I think is because Atlanta's kind of not drafted according to plan the last couple of years with their number one draft picks. They had the 4th draft pick in 2021. They took Kyle Pitts as a tight end hybrid wide receiver. Last year, they had the 10th or 11th pick. They took Drake London, the wide receiver, out of UNC. Kyle Pitts, go back, Philly boy, played at Florida. And now this year, it wouldn't surprise me if they took Robinson, if they're going to build around and they're surrounding Desmond Ridder, their 3rd-round draft pick quarterback from Cincinnati last year, surrounding him with some playmakers. That could be the way they go. Chicago, I don't think, would take him. But again, you just never know. And this draft is the most unpredictable because there's not some surefire top 2 quarterbacks coming out of the draft. And that's what makes it so effective and so much fun this year. Plus, you also have the Eagles and the Seahawks drafting in the top 10, and both teams are playoff teams. They don't have a lot of needs. They don't have a lot of needs that Chicago, Carolina has. Arizona has some needs. Every team in it usually has a lot of needs, and the Eagles and the Seahawks don't. So they have a little bit more flexibility in where they want to draft. For example, Trayvon Walker, who went number 1 to the Jacksonville Jaguars last year, he wasn't the number 1 overall pick consensus until towards the last week or two. With him and Aiden Hutchinson, who went number 2 to Detroit. There's a lot of talk about who will get those two. And Trayvon Walker's up the draft board. And that's what makes the draft so much fun, and who's going to draft what trades are going to happen, and who's going to do what, and where they're going to go, and all that fun stuff. But I don't think the Eagles will have 2 number 1 draft picks They're either going to use that 30 pick. They're either going to trade back from 10 to maybe land a player that could be falling, like a Robinson. And I think they use the 30 pick to try to get some more draft capital. They don't have any draft picks after the second round until the 6th or 7th round. So they have no 3rd, 4th, or 5th, or no 4th and 5th. They'll probably not. They'll probably trade it back into those rounds, we call it, to get some of those picks. And they have a slew of picks next year because of all the free agents that they lost. They have something. There's an email. They have something of a. What happens when you lose a lot of players in free agency, you get compensatory picks, and that's where the Eagles are right now to look at some of those picks. So we shall see what they're going to do. It's going to be a fun night. It's a lot of fun there. So I want Robinson. I do think it's going to be Skronsky, Carter, Nolan Smith, or Paris Johnson. They're all linemen, 2 on the defensive side, 2 on the offensive side. Paris Johnson, he's the offensive tackle from Ohio State. There's talk that he could go number 3 now, and I did not see that anywhere until this week where he could be. And if he goes number 3, that could set off, everything from Arizona is supposed to be drafting is a defensive tackle or defensive lineman that could come in and make a difference. So it's going to be wild, wild night, and that's what it's all about. Tomorrow is a good night because the second and third rounds, you get some more quality picks. And then Saturday, if you're really a draft nut and you have nothing to do on a Saturday, you watch the NFL draft. That's what you do. It's supposed to be raining here all day. I have some plans. I probably won't tune in as much. But and also because the Eagles don't have many picks. But that's what it is. It's a lot of fun, and the NFL set this up in a great, great way. And after this weekend, all the excitement, all the hype for these draft picks, especially number 1 picks, they'll go to their teams, they get introduced, they get interviewed by the media, roll out the red carpet for them, and in a couple of weeks they'll be at, they'll be at OTAs will be coming up, which are sort of like the preseason of the NFL, where you start running through some of the plays, no tackling, just running through the playbook, see who's in shape, things like that. So football season's starting around the corner and getting ready for another run at it. It's been the Matt Kwasiborski Show. I'm not going to talk the Phillies. I'll touch on a little bit. Look, they're 13-13. They started out 0-4, 1-5 against the Rangers and the Yankees. When you went into the season, looking at the Rangers, they should have won that series. Rangers are a much better team this year. They got better manager. He's got those big-time acquisitions playing. The Rangers are in first place in the NL West, and their run differential, which means they've scored way more runs than they have given up. I'm going to look that up right now. I think that's always an indication of how really strong your team is. And then they went into the Yankees, and the Yankees in New York. That's always a tough place to play. And then they're back to 500. So they're 13-13. They enter in the toughest part of the stretch. So, for example, about the run differential, Texas was 14-10. Not crazy record, but their run differential is 56. They've scored 56 more runs. That's a really strong margin. Where you take the Phillies, who are 13-13, even record, have won 2 in a row. They're -10. And they've been getting hit around a lot. Then you take some other teams that may be doing fairly well, like the Arizona Diamondbacks. They're 14-12 in first place, but they're at a -2, which to me means Arizona is not going to be in first place for much longer. They're just not. The San Diego Padres are 13-14. They have a -20, which is surprising to me as I'm just checking this out. And if you want the very worst one of these differentials, it's the Oakland A's, soon to be Las Vegas. They're 5 wins, 20 losses, and they have a minus run differential of 112. They might challenge the New York Mets for the worst team ever in baseball. When you look at those projections, that's awful. That's until they play the Phillies, they'll win that series because that's what the Phillies do against bad teams. But that's the way it is. Look, the Phillies are 13-13. They're only 4.5 out. Atlanta's been skidding. Well, they've won 3 in a row, but they're in a little bit of a skid there. They're only a game and a half behind the Mets, who I don't think the Mets are as good as people think they're going to be. They got some. I don't think they improved their offense enough, and they've signed Verlander to go with Scherzer. And they're 2 pitchers that haven't pitched well in the playoffs lately, so I don't think the Mets are going to be there. But then again, you never know. With the Phillies, they need an anchor in their lineup. They're getting hits. They're not getting hits with runners in scoring position. Their bullpen has been really good, a lot better than it was in the beginning, especially the acquisitions of Kimbrel and Soto are kind of settling into their own rhythms there. The way baseball does it, you don't always have that appointed closer who's the closer no matter what. You just don't see that every day as much as you used to throughout the entire league. Some teams still employ that strategy, but a lot of teams have gotten away with it where, right now it looks like Jose Alvarado, but when I first saw him, he was pitching the 5th and 6th inning in opening day, whereas now he looks like he's probably going to be the closer. Didn't close it out today, though. Craig Kimbrel, who saved his 397th game, shout out to him. He closed it out today. He was a guy I'm not a fan of that signing, but hey, if he keeps this up, they'll have 2 closers, and that's the way it's going to go. The Phillies enter in a tough stretch. After this, we're going to look at their schedule real quick. They will get Bryce Harper. Will probably be back this time next week. It's looking like if he gets the clearing from his doctor out in LA. So they're in Houston starting tomorrow night, rematch of the World Series. Then they go out to LA. LA's not playing all that well, and the Phillies have beaten them, but it's still in LA. Then they come home for a strange Rockies Blue Jays 5-gamers. Then they go back out to Colorado and San Francisco, and then they come home after that. This year, baseball has changed a lot of the rules. I'm not going to get into that, but they've changed the scheduling to, I think, every team plays everybody. So the Phillies will play all the other teams this year, the first time in the history. And it makes these this 3-game road trip from into LA and not have to play San Francisco or San Diego, which they usually do, or Colorado, which what they usually used to do, just go out for 9-10 games and get it out of the way. They're not doing that. So they go to LA, come home for 5 games, then go back to Colorado and San Francisco. That's tough. I don't care how bad Colorado is or how bad the Giants are. It's still tough to travel to those places and play, especially those ballparks and those cities with the weather. So we're really going to find out what this Phillies team is like in the next 3 weeks through the San Francisco Giants game, which is on the 17th of May. So again, Matt Kwasiborski Show, thanks for being with me. Enjoy the NFL draft tonight. Thanks to my loyal listeners. And again, I'm the 437,153rd podcast out there about Philadelphia sports only about Philadelphia sports. And here we are. Shout out to John for his happy birthday, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you. We'll run that back once again. There it is. Inspire the inspiration. Don't wait for the inspiration to inspire you. Have a wonderful draft weekend, everybody.
We don't stay in the shoes now, and whole building scene in a whole red maybe get the color boss died. When it's the same man, it's gonna come be seen. You know, for trouble, never just a God, believe it's a shame. You're the coming up to slow right, but not sure, hope, just getting on the cover, no time. Oh, but if it's a stand, light the shoes are going, man. You've a tough to the mountains, called your rain, the girls.